For me, as a historian of Soviet cinema, I've always had to think about revolution as a fact in film, as a problem for film. The exhibition that I co-curated in 2017 called Revolution Every Day was on the occasion of the centenary of the Russian Revolution.
My focus in film is really like late 60s to like late 70s in North America. That era of filmmaking is really interesting to me. It was a period of great social change. As a student learning about Soviet cinema, it was all very aestheticized. And the context for the films, what they were for, was barely discussed. So, fast forward 20 some odd years to my studio and meeting Robert and talking about Russian cinema, it seemed like there was a lot there for me to really return to.
The exchange really began, I think, of its own accord once we established that initial basis for it. The moment that Cauleen suggested the Robesons as a focus for our thought experiment, our shared thought experiment, it made immediate sense to me. Paul Robeson was a great African-American figure of the 20th century. He became a singer and an actor. And in the 30s, he became one of the most prominent African-American communists of his day. Slanda was his spouse and a remarkable cultural presence in her own right, increasingly over the years, I think.
I wasn't expecting to be more interested in Islanda than Paul. In this period of time in the 30s, Black people were traveling to Russia, organizing in Harlem, communist leagues, and this is a part of American history that's really not told. I feel like particularly now in these sort of like rampant neoliberal times we're living in, looking at this period of time where Black people were essentially kind of like deeply vested in communism seems really, really interesting, kind of almost urgent. And Islanda was really the engine for investigating this like all over the world. So that's for me in terms of how I work or how I think about making stuff. That's why I look at individuals, not so much for the icon, but for like the window that they produce, you know.
So we have this complexity, all these complexities, and there is maybe the promise that if we can figure out how they coexisted in this one person, we might understand something about the larger systems that coalesced around him.
Going into the archives and looking for Robeson, Paul Robeson and his travels was just tantalizing to me. We literally saw everything there was to see in the archive because of the research you did. There was this one moment that to me was just the light bulb, was in one of the newsreels, and there's just a picture of Paul Robeson being Paul Robeson, and someone hands him this painted portrait of Lumumba. And so then he's standing there, and there's all these sort of young Soviet, like college student looking individuals, and he's standing there holding a picture of Lumumba, and everybody's clapping. And for me, that just brought together a lot of just sort of like random strands of my own interests in a lot of different things, which is really kind of common for how I work, where I just kind of have, piles of non sequiturs like hovering in the back of my mind of things I'm interested in. The archives there just run in this really fascinating way. So without Robert, it would have been impossible for me to figure out how to see anything. And so that was also the kind of a tremendous experience of just sort of being in these places that you spent a lot of time in and are really familiar. You're like having a lot of memories all the time. You're always having memories happen to you.
I've been traveling to Russia for 30 years this year, and I've seen it change very rapidly over those 30 years. But at the same time, I guess I've stopped seeing a lot of things. I know them, and I recognize them, and I navigate them in the ways that I've learned to do that. And it was fascinating to be there with Cauleen, to see it through completely different eyes, to see what she was seeing, and to ask the questions that she was asking. So I felt like I really saw dimensions of Russia that I'd never seen before, from the archives all the way to the Hermitage. It's the same with our class. So, when we talk about revolution in film, I think about Lenin and mass demonstrations and events and monumentalization, etc. And Cauleen gave this masterclass, the first time, I think, first class on the history of the marching band, and why that maybe is where we should be centering our conversation on revolution in film. It never occurred to me, never in my life, to think about where the marching band came from, let alone what kind of revolutionary potential the marching band might hold, especially if filmed. But this is one of those avenues that makes Cauleen a creative artist and me an uncreative historian.
It's mainly through the movie watching that the conversation is really generated. We're sort of like comparing these incredibly crafted, like classical, like Soviet masterpieces with these sort of handmade, scrappy, rogue 70s films that are not referred to as masterpieces by any stretch of the imagination, but to me, are really generative.
Yeah, part of the fascination is just seeing which films Cauleen would include in a syllabus like this, and then how we are going to justify that, what kind of conversation we're going to have about that. And I don't think there's been a film that we've shared that we haven't been able to appreciate together in some way.
In some way, yeah. You're amazing at that. But I'm an improviser, so I'm just trying to like play my horn next to the steady drum beat that Professor Bird offers.
That's me, the steady drum beat.